One pregnant single mother was delivering meal prep containers when a millionaire customer began leaving love notes with the orders. When she discovered who he was, their lives changed forever. A story of love and overcoming that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are watching from. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, cutting through the silence of the small two-room apartment in Chinatown like a sharp blade. Sarah Johnson opened her eyes slowly, feeling the familiar weight of her 6-month belly pressing against the thin mattress. The baby moved, as if it too had woken up to the noise, and she smiled, touching her belly over the faded nightgown. "Good morning, little one," she murmured softly, carefully rising from the bed. Another day of struggle ahead. The bedroom window overlooked a small inner courtyard where some cherry trees were just beginning to show the first buds of spring. It was March, and New York was waking up to that early morning chill that would soon be replaced by the city's typical warmth. Sarah slipped on her worn slippers and walked to the kitchen where pots, spices and ingredients had already been organized since the night before. The morning ritual had become a choreographed dance of necessity. First, she lit the 4-burner stove she had bought used on Craigslist. Then, she started the rice. Always the rice first, because it was the base of everything. While the water boiled, she sorted the beans she had soaked overnight, checking each one with the patience of someone who learned that haste was the enemy of quality. "You have to understand, my love," she said to her belly while sautéing the golden onions. "Your mommy isn't one to give up easily. When your dad left me to find out I was pregnant alone, I could have given in, but that's not how the Johnson family works." The apartment filled with the familiar aroma of home-cooked food. Sarah had learned the secrets of Southern cooking from her grandmother, who always said that food made with love tastes different. Now, at 26, she had turned that heritage into her livelihood. Each meal prep container she prepared carried a piece of the farm where she had grown up in Springfield before venturing to the city in search of a better life. The baked beans were just right, not too dry, not too moist. The cornbread sizzled in the skillet, releasing an aroma that instantly transported her to Sunday lunches at her grandmother's house. Sarah tasted it with a wooden spoon and nodded in satisfaction. It was perfect. It was 7 in the morning when she began assembling the meal prep containers. Each one was a small work of art. Fluffy rice on one side, baked beans on the other, golden cornbread, and a generous portion of sautéed greens. Some also included artisanal sausage she bought directly from the supplier at the municipal market. It was more expensive, but the quality made all the difference. 32 meal prep containers today, she counted aloud, organizing them in the thermal backpack that had become her inseparable companion. "If I sell them all, I can pay for the prenatal consultation and still have a little left for savings." The backpack weighed almost 20 pounds when loaded, but Sarah had developed a technique to balance the weight without straining her back. The family doctor always warned her not to exert herself too much, but she smiled and nodded, knowing she had no choice. The baby's father had disappeared the same day she told him about the pregnancy, leaving only a note that read, "I'm not ready to be a dad." The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who had matured too quickly, brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, green eyes still shining with determination despite the dark circles, and skin that had taken on a golden hue from pregnancy. Sarah put on the jeans that still fit, a loose navy blue top, and the most comfortable sneakers she owned. Nothing too fancy, but clean and respectable. At 8 o'clock sharp, she locked the apartment and descended the stairs of the 3-story building. Main Street was already bustling, with Japanese merchants opening their shops and the aroma of dumplings being prepared at the corners. Sarah loved living in Chinatown. There she felt embraced by the diversity, the sounds, and the smells that reminded her that New York was made up of many worlds in one. The walk to the subway station took 15 minutes. Sarah greeted acquaintances along the way. Mr. Smith from the newsstand, Mrs. Brown from the pharmacy, the Japanese students attending the local schools. Everyone knew the meal prep girl and always asked about the baby with genuine affection. On the subway, she secured a seat in the priority section. Pregnancy had its perks, however small. During the 40-minute ride to Central Park Station, Sarah mentally reviewed her route for the day. First, the law office on the 20th floor of the Empire State Building, then the advertising agency on the 15th floor of the National Building, and finally, the most mysterious client, the man from the 32nd floor of the World Trade Center right on Fifth Avenue. "He always orders a full English breakfast," she murmured to herself, checking that she had prepared the special meal correctly. "A $50 tip every week without fail. He must be some important executive." The Central Park Station spilled Sarah into the typical hustle and bustle of Fifth Avenue at 9 in the morning. Rushed executives, students carrying heavy backpacks, tourists photographing the mirrored buildings reflecting the grey March sky. She adjusted the strap of her thermal backpack and took a deep breath, preparing for another day of work. The first building was already familiar. The security guard, Mr. Roberts, always greeted her with a sincere smile. "Hey, Sarah, how's the little one today?" "Moving a lot, Mr. Roberts. I think he's going to be a soccer player," she replied, caressing her belly. "If it's a girl, she'll be a player then. Nowadays they are really dominating everything." The light-hearted conversation always lifted her spirits. In the elevator, Sarah checked once more to ensure all the lunchboxes were tightly sealed and at the right temperature. Her reputation had been built on quality and punctuality, values she learned on her grandmother's farm, where a promise meant more than any contract. The law firm occupied the entire floor. Dr. Smith, the senior partner, always welcomed Sarah personally, treating her with a respect that many did not show. "Sarah, my dear, how are you? And when is that baby due?" "In May, doctor, not long now." "I imagine it must be hectic for you. If you need anything, any legal advice on labor rights or anything like that, you can count on me, all right?" Gestures like that renewed Sarah's faith in the kindness of people. She delivered 6 lunchboxes, received the payment correctly, and headed to the next address. The backpack was lighter, but it still weighed on her back, which was starting to complain from the effort. The day continued its familiar routine when Sarah finally arrived at the World Trade Center. It was always the last on the list, not by coincidence. There was something about that place that made her slightly nervous. Perhaps it was the grandeur of the marble in the lobby, or the way the employees looked at her as if she were an intruder in a world where she did not belong. But the man on the 32nd floor was different, always polite, always with a sincere thank you that sounded genuine. Sarah never knew his name. He always paid in cash, leaving a generous tip without any special comment. Today, however, when the elevator stopped on the 32nd floor and Sarah walked down the grey carpeted hallway towards the corner office, she had no idea that her life was about to take a completely different turn. The lunchbox with baked beans was perfect, still warm, and with that aroma that made any Brazilian sigh with nostalgia. Sarah knocked on the door and waited, as she always did, adjusting her blouse and taking a deep breath. "Come in." The deep, gentle voice invited her into another day she thought would be like all the others. The office, on the 32nd floor, was a study in contrasts that Sarah had never fully noticed before. The walls were covered in an elegant charcoal grey, adorned with contemporary artworks that she did not recognize, but that conveyed a sense of sophistication and good taste. A solid mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by Italian leather chairs that probably cost more than she earned in 3 months. But what always caught her attention were the enormous glass windows that occupied 2 entire walls, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of New York that took her breath away. From up there, the city looked like a living organism, pulsating with the incessant movement of cars, people, and dreams. "Good morning, Sarah." She jumped slightly. It was the first time he said her name. The man stood by the windows, contemplating the urban landscape, with his hands shoved into the pockets of his perfectly tailored dress pants. He was tall, about 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out the clearly expensive navy suit well. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his hands through it several times, a gesture Sarah had noticed on other occasions that made him seem more human, less intimidating. "Good morning, sir. I brought your baked beans as always," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the surprise of being called by name. "It's still nice and warm." He turned to face her, and Sarah could see his eyes clearly for the first time. They were an unusual hazel, almost golden when the morning light hit them. There was a subtle melancholy in that gaze, as if he carried the weight of responsibilities far beyond his apparent age, probably in his early 30s. "You know my name," she said, more as a statement than a question, as she placed the lunchbox on the coffee table near the reading chairs. "Richard," he replied simply, extending his hand in an elegant but not condescending manner. "Richard Anderson. And yes, I asked your name from the receptionist. I hope you don't mind." Sarah hesitated for a second before shaking his hand. It was firm, but not overly strong, and his hands were surprisingly calloused for someone who clearly worked behind a desk. There was a story there that she couldn't decipher. "I don't mind at all. It's just that, well, usually clients don't ask. Maybe because usually clients don't pay attention to what really matters," he said, and there was a sincerity in his voice that made Sarah's heart race slightly. "Your food is exceptional, Sarah. It's as if each lunchbox comes loaded with emotional memories." She felt her face heat up at the compliment. She wasn't used to receiving such direct recognition for her work. "It's my grandmother's recipe," she explained, unconsciously stroking her belly. "She always said that food made in a hurry doesn't feed the soul." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. Suddenly, he no longer seemed like the distant, formal executive, but rather someone who understood exactly what she meant. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. I grew up on a farm in Texas, and the cook there, Mrs. Johnson, used to say the same thing." He paused, as if reliving distant memories. "It's been a long time since I've tasted that flavor of home." Sarah noticed a shadow pass over his face, a sadness that was quickly masked as he turned to the table to grab his wallet. As always, he carefully sorted the bills, $50 exactly for the tip, in addition to the agreed amount for the lunchbox. "Sir Richard, you don't need to tip so generously every week," Sarah said, as she had mentioned before. "The price of the lunchbox already includes everything." "It's not about necessity, Sarah. It's about recognizing value when I see it." He paused, looking directly at her. "And please just call me Richard. Mr. makes me feel too old for my 34 years. She chuckled softly, relaxing her posture a bit. "All right, Richard, but then you can stop treating me like I'm fragile. I'm tougher than I look." "I imagine so," he said, his eyes involuntarily drifting to her rounded belly. "How many months?" 6, due in May," she replied, noticing that he didn't comment on the absence of a ring on her finger. Most people did. "It must be an intense time. Working in this condition. Do you have help?" "Family." The question was asked with genuine concern, without a hint of judgment. Sarah felt a pang of unexpected emotion. "I have my mom in the countryside, but she has her own life to manage. And I prefer to handle things on my own." Richard nodded, as if he perfectly understood the feeling of independence she expressed. I respect that, but we all need a support network sometimes. The intercom on the desk emitted a discreet beep, interrupting the moment. A female voice spoke efficiently. "Mr. Richard, you have a meeting with the board in 15 minutes. Thank you, Carla. I'm on my way down." Sarah realized she had stayed longer than usual in the office. Normally, the delivery was quick and efficient. She would enter, drop off the lunchbox, receive payment, and leave. Today had been different, more personal. "Well, I need to go then," she said, grabbing her thermal backpack. "I still have other deliveries to make." "Of course, and Sarah?" He called her as she was almost at the door. "Thank you, not just for the food, but for bringing a bit of humanity to this place." She turned to look at him one more time. He was leaning against the desk, arms crossed, and there was something vulnerable in his posture that contrasted with the imposing environment around them. "You're welcome, Richard. See you on Thursday." In the descending elevator, Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't just the baby moving. It was something different, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a genuine human connection in that conversation that went beyond the usual business relationship. "Calm down, Sarah," she murmured to herself, seeing her reflection in the elevator's mirrored doors. "He's just a polite client. Don't turn this into something it's not." But when she reached the ground floor and greeted the doorman, she realized she was smiling in a way she hadn't in months. There was something in the way Richard had said her name, in the sincerity of his words, in the way he looked directly into her eyes, without judgment. The afternoon passed normally. Sarah made the remaining deliveries, returned home, and began preparations for the next day. But as she sorted the ingredients and seasonings, her mind kept drifting back to the morning conversation. There was something about Richard that piqued her curiosity. The mention of the farm in Texas, the subtle sadness in his eyes, the way he valued her work. It felt as if he understood, in some way, the world she came from. When she finally lay down that night, Sarah felt the baby settle into a more comfortable position. She stroked her belly thoughtfully. "What an interesting day we had today, little one," she whispered in the dark. "We met someone different." What she didn't realize was that, on the other side of the city, in a luxurious apartment in the Upper West Side, Richard Anderson was also lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the green-eyed woman who brought more than just food to his office. She brought a reminder that there was a world beyond numbers, spreadsheets, and endless meetings. And on his nightstand, for the first time in years, he picked up a pen and a piece of paper, thinking of words he wanted to say, but didn't yet have the courage to express in person. The following Thursday, Sarah woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness from her pregnancy. Since the conversation with Richard, she found herself thinking about him more often than she would like to admit. There was something in that man's sincerity that stirred her carefully constructed defenses after so many disappointments. The morning routine went on as usual. Waking up at 5, preparing the lunchboxes, organizing the thermal backpack. But today, she put a little extra care into Richard's lunchbox, adding some pieces of smoked ribs she had found on sale at the farmer's market. It was a special touch that he would surely notice. "It's nothing special," she said to her belly while adjusting the seasoning. "Just a little extra effort for a good client. Any businesswoman would do that." But she knew she was lying to herself. There was something more there, a desire to impress him that went beyond professionalism. The journey to Fifth Avenue went smoothly. The deliveries at the first buildings were quick and efficient as always. But when Sarah arrived at the World Trade Center, her heart raced slightly. How ridiculous, she thought. She was a grown woman, pregnant, with serious responsibilities ahead. She couldn't keep acting like a lovesick teenager. On the 32nd floor, she knocked on Richard's office door and waited for his deep voice to invite her in. "Good morning, Richard," she said, entering with her professional smile. "Sarah, great to see you." He was sitting behind the desk this time, surrounded by papers and with his computer on, but he closed the laptop as soon as she entered. "How are you feeling? And the baby?" "We're doing well. He's moving a lot today. I think he's excited about something." Richard smiled with genuine joy. "That's wonderful. It must be an incredible feeling." Sarah placed the lunchbox on the coffee table, noticing that there was a half-empty cup of coffee and some documents scattered around. He was clearly working hard. "I don't want to interrupt your work," she said. "I'll leave this here and—" "You're not interrupting anything. In fact, you're probably the best part of my day lately." The sincerity of the statement caught her off guard. Sarah looked at him more closely and noticed signs of fatigue on his face. Subtle dark circles, a tension in his shoulders that she hadn't noticed before. "You look stressed. Is everything okay?" "Complicated family issues," he said vaguely, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as one of his nervous tics. "But nothing that your food can't help improve." Sarah took the payment as usual, but when she was putting the money in her wallet, Richard said, "Sarah, before you go, could you return the lunchbox from last week? I forgot to ask." She frowned, confused. "But I always collect the empty lunchboxes when I come to deliver the new ones. I didn't take any from last week." "Oh, that's right. Sorry, I've been a bit distracted lately." There was something strange about the way he said that, but Sarah didn't question it. She said goodbye as usual and left the room. Only in the elevator going down did she realize what had happened. In her haste to put away the money, she hadn't properly checked the empty lunchbox from the previous week. When she opened her thermal backpack to organize it better, she found Richard's clean lunchbox from their last meeting. And inside it, carefully folded, was a piece of paper. Sarah's heart raced. With slightly trembling fingers, she unfolded the paper. It was fine stationery of good quality, and the handwriting was elegant and careful. "Sarah, I hope you don't take offense at this liberty, but I couldn't resist writing a few words that I didn't have the courage to say in person. Your food transports me to a simpler and happier time in my life when I was just a boy running through the fields of my grandfather's farm in Springfield. I grew up eating in the kitchen with the staff, listening to their stories, learning about dignity and hard work. Somehow, you remind me of those authentic people who shaped who I really am, before the business world forced me to wear masks that I sometimes forget how to take off. Thank you for bringing this little piece of home into my days, which have lately been harder than I'd like to admit. With sincere admiration, Richard." Sarah read the note 3 times before the words truly settled. In her heart, there was a vulnerability in those lines that completely contrasted with the image of a successful executive that Richard projected. He had exposed himself in a way she hadn't expected, revealing an emotional connection that went far beyond the business transaction. "Oh my God," she murmured softly, leaning against the elevator wall as it stopped on the ground floor. The baby kicked, as if also reacting to the emotion of its mother. Sarah instinctively rubbed her belly, trying to process what had just happened. For the rest of the day, as she finished her deliveries and headed home, her mind couldn't shake off the note. Richard's words echoed in her head, the mention of the farm in Springfield, the reference to authentic people, the admission of difficult days. There was a genuine soul behind that expensive suit, someone who understood where she came from because apparently he had been there too. At home, Sarah stored the note in a shoebox where she kept important documents. But throughout the night, While preparing the lunchboxes for the next day, she found herself thinking about how to respond. Would it be appropriate? Would it be wise, considering her situation? "What do you think, little one?" she asked her belly while seasoning the baked beans. "Is your mom going crazy, or is there something special happening here?" The baby kicked strongly, making her smile. It was as if he were saying, "Live a little, Mom." That night, for the first time in months, Sarah picked up a pen and a piece of paper. She wrote and rewrote several versions, tearing some up, saving others. Finally, at 2 in the morning, she managed to write something that expressed how she felt without being too intimate or inappropriate. "Richard, thank you for your kind words. I don't take offense. On the contrary, it's comforting to know that my food evokes good memories. I also grew up on a farm, and I know how special the love we receive from the kitchen is. My grandmother always said that food made with love tastes different, and I try to honor that lesson in every lunchbox I prepare. I hope the difficult days pass soon, and that you find peace amidst life's complications. With affection, Sarah." It was simple, but sincere. It didn't say everything she wanted to say, but it opened a door to something more. She carefully folded the paper and placed it in her backpack to deliver along with the lunchbox next week. When she finally lay down, Sarah felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation that she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was something developing there, something delicate and precious that could easily be destroyed if not handled with care. The baby settled into a comfortable position, and she rubbed her belly thoughtfully. "We're entering unknown territory, little one," she whispered in the dark, "but maybe, just maybe, this is exactly where we need to be." That same night, on the other side of the city, Richard Anderson was also awake, looking out the window of his apartment at the lights of the city that never sleeps. He had made a decision he knew was risky by writing that note. But there was something about Sarah that inspired him to be more honest, more true to himself. He didn't yet know that she had decided to respond, but he felt a strange anticipation for their next meeting. For the first time in years, Thursday couldn't come fast enough. The week that followed was a delicious torture for Sarah. Each day felt like an eternity as she awaited Thursday's arrival. The response note burned in her conscience like an unfulfilled promise, carefully stored in her thermal backpack alongside her spices and utensils. "You seem different this week, dear," commented her neighbor Mrs. Tanaka, a 70-year-old Japanese woman who had become a sort of adoptive mother since Sarah moved to the neighborhood. "You have a light in your eyes that I haven't seen in a long time." Sarah blushed slightly as she organized her groceries at the entrance of the building. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Tanaka." "Oh, I know. It's the look of a woman in love. I recognize that expression. I have 3 daughters and they all went through it." The lady smiled wisely. "I just hope it's someone who deserves all that light." "It's nothing like that," protested Sarah, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. "It's just a client who has been kind." Mrs. Tanaka didn't seem convinced at all. "Just be careful, dear. A pregnant woman has a more sensitive heart, and not every man is prepared for the responsibility that comes with it." The neighbor's words echoed in Sarah's mind. For the rest of the week, it was true that her situation was complicated. She was 6 months pregnant, single, struggling to build her own business. What successful man would genuinely be interested in someone in her position? Perhaps Mrs. Tanaka was right to warn her against having unrealistic expectations, but every time she read Richard's note, and she read it dozens of times that week, she felt a genuine connection that seemed to transcend the obvious social barriers between them. There was a wounded soul behind those words, someone who understood loneliness and nostalgia in a way that few could comprehend. Thursday finally arrived with a typical March drizzle in New York. Sarah went the extra mile with Richard's full English breakfast, adding a special sautéed kale that her grandmother made on festive days. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folded note at the bottom of the clean lunchbox she would take to him. The journey to Fifth Avenue felt longer than usual. On the subway, Sarah ran into Carla, one of the cleaners who worked the night shift in several buildings in the area. "Hey, Sarah, how's the little one?" "Moving a lot today. I think he's nervous." "About something," Sarah replied, instinctively rubbing her belly. "A baby feels everything the mother feels, you know? My sister cleans some fancy offices on Fifth Avenue, and she always says she can sense when the bosses are stressed just by the way they leave the rooms." Sarah frowned. "Which building does your sister work in?" "World Trade Center, I think. That really tall, all-glass one. She cleans the floor for the important executives. Always full of stories about those rich folks and their dramas." Sarah's heart raced. Could Carla's sister have information about Richard? She fought against her curiosity, trying to keep the conversation casual. "It must be interesting to work in those fancy places." "Interesting is an understatement. My sister has seen it all. Executives crying in the bathroom, family fights screaming, rich people with more problems than the poor." Carla lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Just last week she told me about a new guy, handsome, who stays late working alone. Apparently his family is pressuring him to marry a girl he doesn't want." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. Could it be too much of a coincidence? "What a sad story," she managed to say, keeping her tone neutral. "Yeah, rich people suffer too, right? Just that they suffer in penthouses." The conversation was interrupted as they arrived at the Trianon Masp station. Sarah waved goodbye to Carla, her head buzzing with thoughts. Could it be that Richard was facing family pressures for an arranged marriage? That would explain the difficult days mentioned in the note, the tension in his shoulders, the discreet sadness in his eyes. The first deliveries of the day passed in a haze of anxiety. Sarah could barely concentrate on conversations with her regular clients, her mind completely focused on the upcoming meeting. Finally, she was in the elevator, heading up to the 32nd floor. Her reflection in the mirrored doors showed a nervous woman with slightly flushed cheeks and eyes shining with a mix of anticipation and fear. "Breathe, Sarah," she whispered to herself. "It's just delivering a lunchbox and a note, nothing more." But she knew it was much more than that. It was a step into the unknown, a bet on something that could be wonderful or disastrous. The door to Richard's office was ajar when she arrived. Sarah knocked softly and heard the familiar voice inviting her in. "Sarah!" Richard immediately rose from the armchair where he had been reading some documents. There was a genuine joy on his face that made her heart race. "It's great to see you. How was your week?" "Busy, as always. And yours?" Sarah entered the room, noticing that he seemed more relaxed today, despite the evident signs of fatigue. "Better now," he said simply, and there was a sincerity in those words that made her cheeks flush. Sarah placed the lunchbox on the coffee table, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. This was the moment. She took the empty lunchbox from the previous week and extended it to him. "Here's your lunchbox," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard took the lunchbox, and for a moment their fingers touched. It was a brief contact, but Sarah felt an electric current run through her arm. "Thank you," he said, looking directly into her eyes. There was something different in the way he looked at her today, an intensity that made Sarah feel as if he were seeing directly into her soul. "Well, I need to go," she said, grabbing her backpack. "Other deliveries are waiting for me." "Of course, Sarah," he called her just as she was almost at the door. "Thank you for everything." The way Sarah Johnson said everything carried a weight that went far beyond food. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and left the room. In the elevator going down, she could barely breathe. She had delivered the note. There was no turning back now. Richard would find out that she had read his message and decided to respond. What would happen next week? Meanwhile, in the 32nd floor office, Richard carefully opened the empty lunchbox. When he saw the folded paper, inside his heart raced. Sarah had responded. With slightly trembling fingers, he unfolded the paper and read her words. A slow smile spread across his face as he absorbed every word, every nuance of affection and understanding. She had grown up on a farm too. She understood where he was coming from, and more importantly, she was not offended by his boldness in writing the first note. Richard carefully stored the note in the drawer of his desk, alongside an old photo of him as a child on his grandfather's farm. For the first time in weeks, family problems and the pressures of the arranged marriage felt less oppressive. There was a new light in his life, a genuine connection with someone who saw beyond his social status and wealth, someone who understood him in a way he thought was impossible long ago. On the coffee table, Sarah's full English breakfast awaited, aromatic and inviting. But for a few minutes, Richard simply stood there, holding the note and smiling like a man who had just discovered he was not as alone in the world as he thought. The rain continued to fall gently against the windows of the 32nd floor. But for Richard, the day had inexplicably become clearer. The week following the second note was different from all the others. Sarah found herself smiling for no apparent reason while preparing the lunchboxes, humming old songs that her grandmother used to whistle in the kitchen of the farm. There was a lightness in her movements that hadn't existed for months, as if an invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "That baby is making you radiant," commented Dr. Smith during the prenatal checkup on Wednesday. 7 months now, and you have an energy that many expectant mothers lose at this stage. Is something special happening in your life? Sarah blushed slightly, adjusting her blouse over the belly that grew week by week. "Just work going well, doctor. Nothing much." The doctor didn't seem convinced, but smiled kindly as he checked the baby's heartbeat. "Well, whatever it is, it's doing good for both of you. The baby is developing perfectly." On her way home, Sarah stopped at the farmer's market to buy special ingredients. She had decided to prepare a different full English breakfast for Richard, a secret recipe from her grandmother Mary that included a touch of whiskey and spices she reserved for special occasions. It was a silent way to repay the trust he had placed in her by sharing his vulnerabilities. On Thursday morning, while finalizing the preparations, Sarah found an envelope that had been slipped under her door during the night. Her name was written in an unfamiliar but elegant handwriting. Inside, there was a simple card with a message. "We know about the notes. Stop deluding yourself with impossible fantasies. People like you and him live in different worlds. Please don't complicate a situation that is already delicate." The card was unsigned, but the paper was expensive, the kind used by people accustomed to the best. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone knew about the exchange of notes with Richard. But who and how? "Calm down, little one," she murmured, stroking her belly as she felt the baby stir. "Mommy won't be intimidated by cowardly people who don't even sign their own names." But the truth was that the message had shaken her more than she would like to admit. Throughout the journey to Fifth Avenue, she wondered if she should tell Richard about the anonymous card. Who could be watching them? And why? The first deliveries of the day went normally, but Sarah noticed she was more tense than usual. When she finally arrived at the World Trade Center, she decided to observe the employees more closely, trying to identify any suspicious behavior. At the reception on the 32nd floor, a stylish blonde woman was animatedly talking to Richard's secretary. She wore an expensive suit, and discreet but clearly valuable jewelry. Her posture and the way she spoke, with a tone that suggested she was used to being obeyed, indicated that she belonged to the same social world as Richard. "Of course, he is just going through a rough patch," the woman said, her voice carrying barely concealed irritation. "All men go through this before marriage. It's perfectly normal for him to want a few months of freedom." Sarah pretended to organize her thermal bag, sharpening her ears. "Of course, Miss Jessica," the secretary replied with professional courtesy. "Mr. Richard should be back from the meeting in a few minutes." Jessica. Sarah stored the name in her memory. This must be the fiancée mentioned by Emily's sister, the woman Richard was being pressured to marry. "When he returns, tell him I stopped. To remind him about dinner tomorrow at my parents' house. Dad wants to discuss the final details of the merger between the companies." Jessica paused, her blue eyes sweeping the room with an expression of ownership. "And Emily, dear, it might be best if you don't mention those homemade food deliveries he's been receiving. We know it's just a phase, but we don't need to feed unnecessary eccentricities." Sarah's blood boiled. How dare that woman speak of her work as if it were something shameful? And more importantly, how did she know about the deliveries? The secretary seemed uncomfortable. "With all due respect, Miss Jessica, it's not my place to control Mr. Richard's meals." "Of course not, dear. But when we marry, I will make sure he only has access to—" Marina felt her face heat up with indignation. Street food? Her homemade baked beans, prepared with selected ingredients and recipes passed down through generations, being diminished in this way? At that moment the elevator door opened, and Richard appeared, clearly coming from a meeting. His face was serious, almost grim, but it instantly lit up when he saw Marina. "Marina, good to see you," he said, completely ignoring Jessica and walking directly towards her. "Richard, darling," Jessica interjected between them, forcing a radiant smile. "What a surprise to find you here. I was just talking to Emily about tomorrow's dinner." Richard's face visibly hardened. "Jessica, I didn't know you were coming to the office today." "Well, since you haven't returned my calls, I thought I'd drop by in person." She moved closer to him possessively, placing her hand on his arm. "We need to discuss several important matters." Marina felt like an intruder in that scene. The tension between Richard and Jessica was palpable, and she clearly shouldn't be witnessing that conversation. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, taking a step back. "I can come back later." "No!" Richard's response was more emphatic than necessary, causing Jessica to frown. "I mean, you don't have to. Please, come into my office. Jessica, if you could give me a few minutes." "Of course," Jessica said, but her blue eyes studied Marina with an uncomfortable intensity. "But don't take too long, darling. We have a lot to discuss." In Richard's office, Marina could feel the tension radiating from him in waves. He ran his hands through his hair several times, a gesture she already recognized as a sign of extreme stress. "I'm sorry about this," he finally said. "Complicated family situations, as I mentioned." "The young lady seems determined," Marina commented diplomatically, placing the lunchbox on the table. Richard laughed bitterly. "Determined is an understatement. Jessica and our families have a business arrangement, a marriage that would benefit both companies. And you? What do you want?" The question slipped out before Marina could censor herself. It was too personal, too intimate for the kind of relationship they officially had. Richard looked directly into her eyes, and there was a disconcerting vulnerability in his expression. "I want to choose my own life, to marry for love, not for convenience, to have a family built on genuine feelings, not on profit and loss spreadsheets." Marina's heart raced with the intensity of that gaze. There was an implicit confession in those words that made her tremble. "Marina," he continued, taking a step towards her, "I need to tell you something. These notes, these conversations, They are changing my perspective on a lot of things. You are making me remember who I really am beneath all these expectations and pressures." Before she could respond, the door opened abruptly. Jessica entered without knocking, her eyes immediately focusing on the closeness between them. "Richard, we need to talk now." Her voice was cold, sharp as a scalpel. Then, addressing Marina with a false smile, "Sorry, dear, but this is a private matter." Marina felt diminished, as if she were an employee being dismissed. The humiliation burned on her cheeks, but she maintained her dignity. "Of course. Good afternoon, Richard." "Marina, wait," he began, but Jessica interrupted him. "Let the young lady go, darling. She has work to do." Marina left the office with her head held high. But inside, she was devastated. In the elevator, the tears finally came. The difference between their worlds had never been clearer than at that moment. Jessica was right about one thing. They truly lived in completely different realities. The anonymous note was correct. She was deluding herself with impossible fantasies, but as the elevator descended, Marina couldn't forget Richard's look when he spoke about wanting to choose his own life. There was something there that went beyond kind words or social guilt. There was a real connection, even if complicated by circumstances. The question echoing in her mind was it worth fighting for something like that? Or was it better to protect herself before disappointment became unbearable? The baby kicked hard, as if giving its opinion on the situation. Marina stroked her belly thoughtfully, making a decision that would change everything. She would write one more note, but this time she would be completely honest about her feelings and fears. The night that followed her confrontation with Jessica was one of the longest of Marina's life. She lay down and got up several times, wandering around the small apartment like a restless soul, her hand always resting on the belly that now housed a baby, almost 7 months along. Each movement of the little being seemed to echo her own restlessness, as if mother and child were tuned to the same frequency of anxiety. "What do I do, little one?" she murmured in the dark, looking out the window at the lights of the city that never sleeps. "Your mother is getting into a mess that may not have a way back." At 3 a.m, she finally sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. The words she wanted to write to Richard buzzed in her mind, but organizing them coherently seemed impossible. How to explain the storm of emotions that man stirred in her? How to be honest about her feelings without sounding desperate or naive? Marina began to write, tore the paper, started again. On the 4th attempt, she finally managed to put on paper something close to what she felt. "Richard, I need to be honest with you about some things that are happening and about what I feel. Yesterday, after what I witnessed with Jessica, I realized that our situation is more complicated than I imagined. Someone left an anonymous note at my door, warning me to stop with the impossible fantasies. I know I come from a different world than yours. I'm a pregnant woman, single, who struggles every day to survive selling lunchboxes. You are a successful businessman with family and social responsibilities that I can't even imagine. Logically, we should..." Sarah felt a strange relief as she finished writing, as if she had finally released a weight she had been carrying in her chest. It was a risky note that could end any possibility of a relationship between them. But she needed a clear answer, a definition that would allow her to move forward, whatever direction that might be. The next morning, Sarah prepared the lunchboxes with special care, focusing on every spice, every detail. If this was to be the last time she prepared food for Richard, she wanted it to be perfect. The baked beans were just right, with an aroma that filled the entire apartment with nostalgia and warmth. During her journey to Fifth Avenue, she encountered Emily again on the subway. The woman seemed agitated, full of news to share. "Sarah, what a coincidence to run into you again. My sister has all..." The gossip about that building where she works. Sarah tried to maintain a neutral expression, even though her heart raced. Oh, really? What kind of gossip? It seems there was quite a scene yesterday on the executive floor. The cleaning lady overheard an argument between that handsome guy I told you about and a well-dressed woman. She was yelling about him lowering himself, and he was saying he was tired of having his life controlled by his family. Sarah swallowed hard. The argument had happened after she left the room then. "Wow, what a complicated situation," she commented, trying to sound casual. "Indeed. And you know what's even more interesting? My sister said the guy spent the rest of the afternoon locked in the room, not answering calls or receiving visitors, as if he were making some important decision." Sarah's heart raced. Could the conversation with Jessica have forced Richard into some kind of definition? "Sometimes people need time to think," she said, more to herself than to Emily. When they arrived at the World Trade Center station, Emily waved goodbye with a friendly gesture. "Take good care of that baby, Sarah, and of yourself too. A pregnant woman has to avoid stress." Easier said than done, Sarah thought, as she walked toward the first buildings on her route. The morning deliveries passed in a haze of anxiety. Sarah could barely concentrate on conversations with clients, her mind completely focused on the upcoming meeting. The note weighed in her backpack like an unspoken confession, a bridge that, once crossed, would not allow for a return. When she finally arrived at the World Trade Center, Sarah noticed a different activity in the lobby. There were more security guards than usual, and a group of men in expensive suits were talking near. The elevators, with serious expressions. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts," she greeted the familiar doorman. "Is something different happening today?" The man looked around cautiously before responding in a low voice. "Important meeting on the 32nd floor. It seems to be about a merger or something like that. Young Mr. Richard has been meeting with the family since early this morning." Sarah's stomach tightened. Could it be about the marriage with Jessica? About the merger mentioned in the conversation she had overheard? On the 32nd floor, the atmosphere was visibly tense. The secretary, Emily, seemed nervous, constantly answering calls and organizing documents with quick, efficient movements. "Good morning, Emily. Is Mr. Richard available to receive the lunchbox?" The secretary looked at her with a strange, almost pitying expression. "Sarah, dear, it might be better for you. Well, it might be better to leave the lunchbox with me today. Mr. Richard is in a very important meeting and—" "Emily, it's fine. Let Sarah in." Richard's deep voice came from behind her. Sarah turned around and barely recognized him. He looked visibly worn out, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that she had never seen before. He wore a sharp suit, but his posture revealed the emotional weight he carried. "Richard," she said softly, feeling a sudden urge to comfort him. "Are you okay?" He smiled, but it was a sad smile, filled with a melancholy that made Sarah's heart ache. "Can we talk in my office?" Inside the office, the atmosphere was different. Papers were strewn everywhere, 2 empty coffee cups on the table, and an air of conclusion, as if important decisions had been made. "Sorry for the mess," Richard said, running his hands through his hair. "It's been an intense morning." Sarah placed the lunchbox on the coffee table, noticing that he didn't come over to take the payment as he usually did. Instead, he remained near the windows, looking out at the city with a distant expression. "Richard, did something happen?" He turned to face her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that frightened her. It was as if he were saying goodbye. "Sarah, I need to tell you some things. About my family, about the pressures I've been facing, about decisions I need to make." Her heart raced. The moment of truth had come. She could feel it. "My family built this business empire over 3 generations. he began, his voice controlled but filled with emotion. My grandfather started with a small farm in Texas. My father turned it into one of the largest agribusiness conglomerates in the country. And I was supposed to be the heir who consolidates everything through an alliance. Strategic marriage. Sarah listened in silence, feeling the baby move restlessly in her belly. This morning my family gave me an ultimatum. Either I marry Jessica in the next 3 months, securing the merger with her company, or I'm disowned and lose everything. The business, my position, my social standing. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She already knew where this conversation would lead. "And what was your decision?" she asked, though her voice came out almost as a whisper. Richard looked her directly in the eyes, and there was a steely determination in his expression that contrasted with the vulnerability she saw there. "I said no." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I said no to the marriage, no to the blackmail, no to a life I never chose." He took a step toward her. "Sarah, in the past few months, you've reminded me of who I really am. You've made me question whether money and social status are worth more than honesty and genuine connections." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard that she was sure he could hear it. "Richard, you can't be serious. You're going to lose everything because of what? You?" He smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, filled with a tenderness that made her eyes well up with tears. "Sarah, you are not the reason for my break with my family. You are the inspiration that gave me the courage to do what I should have done years ago." She felt the tears begin to roll down her cheeks. It was too much to process, too intense, too risky. "But what now? What will happen to you?" "Now I'm going to discover who Richard Anderson is when he's not trying to meet others' expectations." He moved closer, reaching out to gently touch her face. "And I hope, if you allow it, to discover this alongside someone who sees me as a person, not as an heir." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling his touch burn her skin. It was everything she had dreamed of, and everything she feared at the same time. "Richard, you know my situation is complicated. I'm pregnant, without family nearby, struggling to survive. Are you sure you want to get involved in all this chaos?" "Sarah," he said softly, forcing her to look into his eyes, "I've never been so sure of anything in my life." In that moment, Sarah knew her life had changed forever. The obstacles, the social differences, the external pressures didn't matter. There was something real and powerful growing between them, something worth the risk. She took the note from her backpack and extended it to him. "Before you say anything else, you need to read this. I wrote it during the night." Richard took the paper carefully, as if it was something precious. As he read, Sarah watched every change in his expression, every nuance of emotion that passed through his eyes. When he finished, he folded the note carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. "Thank you for your honesty," he said. "Now you know what I really want from us, Sarah. I want a real chance to build something genuine together." Sarah took a deep breath, caressing her belly where her child was moving, as if also making an important decision. "Then we're going to have to be very brave," she finally said, "because the world isn't going to make things easy for us." "Let the world come," Richard replied, smiling with a determination she had never seen before. "I'm ready for the fight." 3 days passed since the transformative conversation in Richard's office, and Sarah still felt as if she were living in a strange and intense dream. The routine of preparing lunchboxes, making deliveries, and taking care of the house continued the same, but there was a different energy in everything she did, as if the world had gained brighter colors. On Monday morning, while seasoning the baked beans for the day's lunchboxes, Sarah was interrupted by persistent knocks on the door. It was only 7 in the morning, too early for visitors. When she opened the door, she found Mary, her mother, standing in the hallway with a small suitcase and a worried expression that Sarah knew all too well. "Mom?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "What are you doing here?" Mary Anderson was a 58-year-old woman who carried in her calloused hands and tired eyes all the harshness of a life dedicated to farm work. Short and strong, with grey hair always tied in a neat bun, she had that authoritative presence typical of matriarchs who wouldn't tolerate nonsense. "I received a strange call yesterday," she said, pushing her daughter inside the apartment and closing the door behind her. "An elegant woman said she was a family friend and that she was worried about you. She said you were getting involved with a married man, committed, I don't know what else." Sarah's blood ran cold. Jessica. It could only be Jessica. "Mom, Is it a lie?" Mary interrupted, crossing her arms and staring at her daughter with that intensity that made Sarah feel like a teenager being interrogated again. Sarah sighed, guiding her mother to the sofa. It was no use lying to Mary. The woman had a sixth sense for detecting half-truths. "It's complicated, Mom. Sit here, let me explain." While preparing a strong coffee, just the way her mother liked it, Sarah told the whole story from her first meeting with Richard to his decision to break with his family. Mary listened in silence, occasionally nodding, her expressive eyes alternating between concern and disapproval. "Sarah Mary Anderson," her mother said when she finished the story, using her daughter's full name as she always did when she was upset. "You're telling me you got emotionally involved with a rich man who left his family because of you while you're 7 months pregnant with another man?" Framed this way, it sounded even more complicated than Sarah imagined. "It's not exactly like that, Mom. He didn't leave his family because of me. He made a decision about his own life. And what about you? Did you think you were going to become a fairy tale princess?" Mary's voice was laden with that hard wisdom that came from decades of facing disappointments. "Honey, you're expecting a baby who will be born in 2 months. This isn't the time for romance. It's time to be practical." Sarah felt her eyes welling up with tears. Part of her knew her mother was right, but another part rebelled against the cold pragmatism of that analysis. "Mom, I know it sounds crazy, but there's something real between us. He sees me as a person, not as charity or a fantasy, and I haven't felt that in a long time." Mary softened her expression slightly upon seeing her daughter's vulnerability. "Sarah, my love, I understand that you're craving affection, especially after what that jerk David did to you. But think about it. What future can you have with a man who just lost everything? How are you going to support a family?" The question echoed in Sarah's mind for the rest of the day. While making her deliveries, she couldn't stop thinking about her mother's words. It was true that Richard had given up his inheritance, but she didn't know exactly what that meant in practical terms. Did he have other resources, alternative plans, or was he as lost as she was regarding the future? On Thursday, when she arrived at the World Trade Center, Sarah immediately noticed that something had changed. The atmosphere was different, colder, more formal. Some employees looked at her strangely, and the receptionist, who always greeted her warmly, barely lifted her eyes as she passed. On the 32nd floor, Emily, the secretary, seemed visibly uncomfortable when Sarah approached. "Good morning, Emily. Is Mr. Richard in?" "Sarah, dear," Emily spoke, in a low voice, nervously looking around. "There have been some changes here. Mr. Richard is no longer occupying this office." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean? Was he fired?" "Not exactly fired, but he requested a transfer to another department." Something about wanting to start over, prove his worth, independent of family connections. Emily paused, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah, it might be better if you don't bring any more lunchboxes here. The new management, well, they don't approve of that kind of service. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. In just a few days, her world had changed completely, and now she discovered that Richard's had also been turned upside down. "Where can I find him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Emily looked around once more before quickly writing an address on a piece of paper. "He's working at the downtown office, but Sarah—" She hesitated. "Maybe it's better to think carefully before you go there. Things are complicated." Back in the elevator, Sarah felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She needed to see Richard, understand what was happening, find out if her decision to support him had been a terrible mistake, or if there was still hope for them. The downtown office was a stark contrast to the elegance of Fifth Avenue. A simple office building, without a uniformed doorman or marble in the lobby. Sarah went up to the 8th floor, following the address Emily had given, and found a door with a discreet sign, Agribusiness Consulting, R. Anderson. When she knocked on the door, a familiar voice said, "Come in," but there was something different in the tone, more tired, perhaps less certain. Richard was sitting behind a simple wooden desk, surrounded by papers and a computer that clearly wasn't new. When he saw her, his face lit up instantly, but Sarah could see the marks of tension around his eyes. "Sarah, I didn't expect to see you here." He quickly stood up, and she noticed he was wearing a simple dress shirt, no tie, quite different from the impeccably tailored suits he used to wear. "Emily gave me the address. Richard, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me you left the office?" He ran his hand through his hair, the nervous gesture she knew all too well. "Please sit down. There's a lot I need to explain." Sarah settled into the simple chair in front of the desk, noticing that the office was clean and organized, but definitely modest compared to the luxurious environment where they used to meet. "After our conversation last week, my family, well, they followed through on their threat. I was officially removed from the company's board, lost access to corporate accounts and the company apartment. But they didn't leave me completely out on the street. I still have some personal resources I managed to save over the years." Sarah felt the baby moving restlessly, as if reacting to her tension. "Richard, I'm so sorry. It was because of me that—" "No," he interrupted firmly, walking around the desk to kneel beside her chair. "Sarah, look at me. This decision wasn't because of you. It was because of me, for finally having the courage to be who I really am." She looked into his eyes and saw the same determination she had admired, but now mixed with a vulnerability that made her want to protect him. "But what now? How will you survive? How will you rebuild everything?" Richard smiled, and there was a lightness in his expression that she hadn't seen. "In weeks, I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to use the knowledge I have about agribusiness to help small producers, cooperatives, people who really need it. I already have 3 clients interested in consulting." Sarah felt a mix of admiration and terror. Admiration for his courage, terror for the uncertainty of it all. "Richard, I need to be honest with you about one thing. My mom came from Texas after someone, probably Jessica, called her to tell her about us. She thinks that I am being naive, deluding myself with an impossible situation." He gently held her hands. "What do you think?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility she carried. For herself, for the baby about to be born, for the courage that Richard had shown. "I think," she said slowly, "that if we are going to do this, we have to be completely honest with each other about what we are facing, about the fears, about the practical difficulties, about what we can really offer each other." "I completely agree." Richard squeezed her hands. "Sarah, I cannot offer you luxury or immediate financial security. I can offer you hard work, honesty, and a love that grows stronger every day." The tears finally came, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. "Richard, I don't need luxury. I need someone who sees me for who I am, who wants to build something real with me and my child." "Our child," he gently corrected, "if you allow me to be part of his life." Sarah felt the baby kick strongly, as if approving the conversation. "I think he's already approving of you." They laughed together, and in that simple office, far from luxury and family pressures, Sarah felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, they could truly build something lasting and real. But she knew that the real challenges were yet to come. Jessica would not give up easily. Richard's family might try to sabotage them, and they still needed to figure out how to merge their practical lives with the feelings they had discovered. Love, Sarah was learning, was just the first step of a much more complex journey. The weeks that followed Richard's move to the office in downtown were a test of endurance that neither of them had fully anticipated. Sarah, now almost 8 months, pregnant, felt the physical and emotional weight of the situation intensifying each day. The baby was becoming more active, kicking constantly, as if sensing the tension surrounding his imminent arrival. Mary had decided to stay in New York until the birth of her grandchild, settling into her daughter's small apartment with the practical efficiency of a woman used to solving problems. Her presence was simultaneously a comfort and a constant reminder of the practical realities that Sarah preferred not to face. "Sarah, you need to think about the crib, the diapers, the doctor's appointments," Mary said as she compulsively organized the cabinets for the 3rd time that week. "And this man, Richard, where does he fit into this practical equation? Because feelings are nice, but the baby needs food, not poetry." Sarah sighed, stroking her belly as she folded the little clothes she had gradually bought over the past months. "Mum, I know you're worried, but—" "Worried is an understatement, dear. I'm terrified." Mary stopped folding the clothes and looked directly at Sarah. "Do you really want me to believe that a man who just lost $1 million inheritance will be happy living in this tiny apartment, eating baked beans every day and waking up at dawn to a crying baby?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach because it verbalized her own secret fears. During the sleepless nights, which had become frequent as her belly grew, she found herself imagining future scenarios that left her anxious. What would practical life be like with Richard? Did he really understand what he was getting into? On Tuesday of that week, Sarah decided to make a special delivery to Richard's office. She had prepared a nice lunchbox with baked beans, but this time with a different motivation. She wanted to observe how he was adapting to the new reality, if there were signs of regret or frustration that he might be hiding. The downtown building was bustling with the typical lunchtime traffic. Sarah climbed the 8 flights of stairs on foot. The elevator was broken and arrived breathless at the hallway where Richard's office was located. Each step had been a considerable effort with her 8-month belly. When she knocked on the door, she heard voices from the other side. Richard was attending to someone. "Come in, it's open," he said. Sarah pushed the door and found Richard meeting with a middle-aged couple, clearly farmers by the simple way they dressed and the calloused hands holding some yellowed papers. "Sarah!" Richard's face lit up instantly. "What a nice surprise! Please, come in." He stood up and approached her with a naturalness that surprised her, lightly kissing her forehead in a gesture of genuine affection without any embarrassment in front of the clients. "Mr. Smith and Mrs. Johnson, this is Sarah, the special person I told you about. Sarah, these are the owners of the farm in Springfield who need help restructuring their production." Mr. Smith, a tanned and smiling man in his 60s, stood up and greeted Sarah with genuine warmth. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Sarah. Richard told me you have a special talent for homemade food. My Martha here is also an old hand in the kitchen." Mrs. Johnson, a plump and friendly woman, smiled shyly. "Oh, what a beautiful belly! When is the baby due?" "At the end of April," Sarah replied, feeling immediately welcomed by the couple's affectionate simplicity. "Richard here is helping us save our farm," Mr. Smith continued. "After the middlemen started lowering the price of our milk, we thought we would have to sell everything. But he has some revolutionary ideas about direct sales and cooperatives." Sarah looked at Richard and saw an excitement in his eyes that she hadn't noticed in weeks. He was clearly in his element, talking about something that truly passionate him. "Mrs. Johnson makes the best cheese in the region," Richard said, "and Mr. Smith has an exceptional herd. The problem is they are selling to intermediaries who take most of the profit. I'm helping them establish direct sales to restaurants and organic markets here in New York." As Richard explained the project with growing enthusiasm, Sarah observed his expression, posture, and energy closely. There was an authenticity there that she had rarely seen when he worked at the family business. This was the real Richard, not the pressured heir, but the man who genuinely wanted to make a difference in people's lives. After the couple left, carrying contracts and renewed hope, Richard turned to Sarah with a radiant smile. "Sorry to keep you waiting. How are you? And how's our little one?" She smiled at the way he referred to the baby as ours. "We're good. I brought you some baked beans, but I think you won't need it. You seem to be feeding off pure professional satisfaction." Richard laughed, gently kissing her cheek. "It's true. Sarah, for the first time in my life, I feel truly useful. I'm not just moving money around or closing deals that benefit only wealthy shareholders. I'm helping people like Mr. Smith and Mrs. Johnson support their families." Sarah felt her heart warm, but also a pang of concern. "And financially? How are things?" Richard's expression became more serious, but he didn't lose his optimism. "I won't lie. It's tight. I'm living off personal savings, and the first consulting fees are still a bit away. But Sarah—" he held her hands. "I'm happy. Happier than I've been in years." At that moment, the baby kicked strongly, as if participating in the conversation. They both laughed, and Richard gently placed his hand on her belly. "He's eager to meet the world out there," Sarah said. "And I'm eager to meet him," Richard replied with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. But reality interrupted them when the office phone rang. Richard answered, and Sarah could hear a female voice on the other end, cold, cutting, unmistakably Jessica. "Richard, we need to talk. There are pending matters that cannot be ignored indefinitely." Richard's face hardened. "Jessica, we've already discussed everything there was to discuss." "No, we haven't. You made a unilateral decision based on momentary whims. But real life has consequences, Richard. Consequences that you apparently haven't considered." Sarah saw the tension take over Richard's shoulders. "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that can affect others besides you. People who may be misled about your true intentions." Richard's gaze met Sarah's, and she saw anger and protectiveness in his eyes. "If you're implying anything about Sarah, I'm merely suggesting that perhaps it's time for you to be honest with her about your real situation and about what you can offer a pregnant woman who needs stability, not romantic adventures." The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Sarah felt the baby moving restlessly, as if reacting to her tension. "Richard, is she right about anything? Is there something you haven't told me?" He sighed deeply, loosening his tie. "Sarah, the truth is that my financial situation is more delicate than I wanted to admit. I have enough savings for About 6 months, maybe a year if we're very careful. After that, he paused. After that, it will depend on how successful I can be with this consulting. Sarah's heart raced, but not from fear, from determination. Richard, do you think I care if we have to eat baked beans every day? Do you think I need luxury to be happy? It's not about you, Sarah. It's about our son, about giving him the best opportunities, education, health. And do you think money is more important than having a father who loves the work he does, who treats people with respect, who isn't ashamed of his roots? Richard looked at her with a mix of admiration and vulnerability. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve so much optimism. Sarah stepped closer, placing her hands on his face. Richard Anderson, you are the most honest and courageous man I know. If we're going to face hardships, we'll face them together. If we're going to build something from scratch, we'll build it together. But I won't let Jessica or your family make us give up what we have. At that moment, Sarah felt a strong contraction that made her bend slightly. Richard immediately supported her, concern etched on his face. Sarah, are you okay? What is it? I think it's just practice contractions, she said, taking a deep breath. The baby is getting impatient. But as Richard helped her sit down and brought water, Sarah couldn't ignore the fact that perhaps the baby was reacting to more than just her emotions. Maybe it was time to prepare for the arrival of their child, and for all the changes that would bring to her life with Richard. Time was running out to resolve the practical issues they had been avoiding. In a few weeks, they would no longer be just two passionate people navigating social complications. They would be a family with all the responsibilities that entailed, and Sarah knew that the real tests of their relationship were yet to come. The phone rang at 3:30 in the morning on a Thursday at the end of April, cutting through the silence of the small apartment in Chinatown like an emergency siren. Sarah jolted awake, immediately sensing that something was different. The contraction that had woken her was more intense than the previous ones, radiating from her back to the front in a wave of pressure that left her breathless. "Mom," she called, trying to sit up in bed as another contraction came, stronger than the first. Mary appeared at the bedroom door in seconds, with that speed that only mothers develop. Her experienced eyes instantly assessed the situation. "It's time, honey. How many minutes between contractions?" "I don't know. They just started a little while ago, but they are coming fast." Sarah tried to control her breathing, as she had learned in the childbirth preparation classes with her family doctor. "I'm going to call the ambulance service and get David," said Mary, already heading for the phone with the efficiency of a general organizing a military operation. "No, Mom, it's still too early." Sarah began to protest, but was interrupted by another contraction that made her double over. "Sarah Johnson, that boy is not going to wait for your permission to be born, and if David is going to be part of our family, he better show up when it really matters." While Mary spoke with the emergency medical service, Sarah tried to call David. The phone rang several times before he answered, his voice sleepy and confused. "Hello? Sarah, are you okay? What time is it?" "David," she said between controlled breaths, "I think it's time. I'm having real contractions." The silence on the other end lasted only a second before his voice returned, completely awake and focused. "Where are you? Did they call an ambulance? I'm on my way right now." "My mom already called the ambulance service. David, I'm scared." "Don't be scared, my dear. I'll be with you through everything, okay? 20 minutes and I'll be there." The ambulance arrived first, its siren cutting through the neighborhood's silence and waking a few curious neighbors. The paramedic, a young and competent man named John, quickly examined Sarah and confirmed that labor was indeed beginning. "First pregnancy?" he asked, as he helped Sarah settle onto the stretcher. "Yes," Mary answered for her. "And she's nervous. "It's normal to be nervous, ma'am, but from the vital signs, both mother and baby are doing well. Let's take it easy to the hospital." Just as they were about to close the ambulance doors, a taxi abruptly stopped in front of the building. David jumped out of the vehicle with disheveled hair, a t-shirt hastily thrown on, and a look of controlled panic that would have been comical under other circumstances. "Wait!" he shouted, running toward the ambulance. I am... He hesitated, looking at Sarah on the stretcher. "He's the father," Sarah said firmly, reaching out her hand to him. "Or he will be." David climbed into the ambulance and immediately took her hand, kissing her fingers with a tenderness that brought tears to Mary's eyes, despite her initial resistance to their relationship. The ride to the maternity ward of the General Hospital was a mix of tension and unexpected intimacy. Between contractions, which were now coming every 5 minutes, Sarah watched David trying to stay calm while clearly terrified. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," she said during a moment of relief between the pains. This is really intense for someone who isn't prepared." David squeezed her hand tighter. "Sarah, I've spent the last few months learning to face my fears. I'm not going to start backing down now, right at the most important moment." In the maternity ward, the hospital routine took over. Sarah was taken to the pre-labor room, where efficient nurses checked her vital signs and confirmed that dilation was progressing quickly. "It's a hurry-up baby," commented the head nurse, an experienced woman named Jessica. "First pregnancy, but it looks like it's going to be quick." The hours that followed were a test of physical and emotional endurance that no preparatory course could truly anticipate. David stayed by Sarah's side throughout the process, holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering words of encouragement as the contractions intensified. "You're the strongest woman I know," he said during the toughest moments. "Our son is coming, Sarah. He's going to meet the bravest mother in the world." Mary watched everything from the corner of the room, initially skeptical but gradually impressed by David's dedication. When Sarah screamed in pain during a particularly intense contraction, it was David who calmed her with an efficiency that even surprised the experienced nurse. At 6:43 in the morning, after nearly 4 hours of labor, the obstetrician Dr. Smith announced that it was time to start pushing. "Sarah, on the next contraction, you're going to push as if you're having a bowel movement. It may sound strange, but that's exactly what your body needs to do." What happened in the next 20 minutes was a whirlwind of intense sensations, transformative pain, and finally an indescribable relief when a strong, healthy cry echoed through the delivery room. "It's a boy," announced Dr. Smith, holding up a small but perfectly formed baby, covered in protective vernix and crying with the vigorous lungs of someone who had decided he was ready to meet the world. Sarah began to cry immediately, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and instant love that completely enveloped her. David was also crying, looking at the baby with a look of complete admiration. "He's perfect," David whispered as the nurse placed the clean, swaddled baby on Sarah's chest. "Sarah, he's absolutely perfect." The baby stopped crying almost immediately when he felt the warmth of his mother's skin, his dark little eyes opening slightly as if trying to focus on the new world around him. "Hi, my love," Sarah whispered, gently touching the tiny face. "I can finally see you." David leaned in closer, extending a careful finger that the baby immediately grasped with the surprising strength of newborns. "He recognizes me," David said, amazed. "Of course he does," Mary said, finally stepping closer to meet her grandson. "He's heard your voice for weeks. To him, you've always been the father." Nurse Jessica smiled as she noted the information in the chart, baby's name. Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "David," she said. "David Ricardo Johnson." David was visibly moved by the inclusion of his name. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure of everything," Sarah replied, looking into his eyes with a conviction that surprised even herself. "I'm sure." In that moment, amidst the bustling hospital atmosphere, with Sarah exhausted but radiant, Richard emotionally holding the tiny finger of David, and Jessica capturing it all with her phone, none of them noticed the elegant figure observing through the glass of the delivery room. Helen was there, impeccably dressed even at that early hour, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. She had arrived at the hospital following a tip she received through her contacts. Someone had mentioned that Richard Anderson was at the maternity ward, attending the birth of a baby. After a few minutes of watching, Helen stepped away from the glass and took her phone out of her pocket. She made a quick call. "Dad, it's me. I need to talk to you about a situation that might affect our plans. Richard let's say his situation has become more complicated than we anticipated." While Jessica spoke in the hospital corridors, in the delivery room, Sarah had fallen asleep with David in her arms, exhausted but at peace. Richard remained by the bed, watching the two sleep, silently making a decision that would change everything. He loved that woman and that baby. He loved the simple and honest life they were building together, and no matter what obstacles arose, he would be there to protect them. What Richard didn't know was that Jessica had just set in motion a series of events that would test that determination in ways he couldn't even imagine. But for now, in that perfect and protected moment, his family was complete and safe. 3 weeks after David's birth, life had taken on a new routine that was both exhausting and surprisingly rewarding. The small apartment in Chinatown had been reorganized to accommodate the needs of a newborn, with a crib set up next to Sarah's bed and diapers, baby bottles, and tiny clothes scattered around every available corner. Sarah was learning to navigate motherhood with the characteristic determination that had always defined her, but now tempered with a new tenderness that surprised her. David was a relatively calm baby, sleeping well at night and seeming to have inherited his mother's observant temperament and a curious alertness that reminded Richard. "He has your eyes," Mary commented every morning, watching her grandson while preparing coffee. The grandmother had decided to extend her stay for a few more weeks to help Sarah adjust to the new reality. Richard had become a constant presence in the apartment, arriving every morning before 7 with fresh bread from the Japanese bakery on the corner, and leaving only after ensuring that Sarah and David were comfortable for the night. He had transformed a corner of the living room into a makeshift office, where he conducted his consulting work by phone and email, allowing him to always be available to help with the baby. "You don't need to be here all the time," Sarah had said in the first week, watching him change David with a gentleness that contrasted with his large, masculine hands. "Of course I do," he had simply replied. "This is my family now." The word family still sounded strange and wonderful in Sarah's ears. After months of uncertainty about the future, there was something deeply comforting. In the routine they had established, Richard had proven to be a natural father, patient with the nighttime cries, skilled at diaper changes, and completely enchanted by every little milestone in David's development. But the domestic tranquility was about to be dramatically interrupted. On the morning of a sunny Tuesday in May, Sarah was breastfeeding David on the couch while Richard worked on his laptop and Mary organized the kitchen when a firm knock on the door interrupted them. "Are we expecting someone?" Sarah asked quietly, not wanting to disturb David, who was nursing peacefully. Richard frowned, checking the clock. "No. Maybe it's a neighbor." Mary went to answer the door and returned with a worried expression, accompanied by an elegantly dressed middle-aged woman whom Sarah recognized immediately, even though she had never seen her in person. The social photos in the newspapers were unmistakable. Helen Anderson, the matriarch of Richard's family. The woman was striking even at 60, with perfectly styled grey hair, expensive yet sober clothing, and a posture that radiated authority and social class. Her eyes, the same hazel colour as Richard's, swept the apartment with an expression that mixed curiosity and discreet judgment. "Richard," she said, in a controlled voice but laden with emotion, "I finally found you." Richard immediately stood up, closing his laptop. His posture became visibly tense, but Sarah could also see a deep pain in his eyes, the pain of a son missing his family despite everything. "Mom, how did you find me?" "It wasn't difficult. You have always been predictable in your choices of the heart." Helen glanced briefly at Sarah and David, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "May I sit?" Sarah suddenly felt self-conscious about her appearance, hair carelessly tied up, simple home clothes, still carrying some extra pounds from pregnancy. But something in Helen's expression prevented her from feeling ashamed. There was a vulnerability in the older woman's posture that suggested this was not a confrontational visit, but something more complex. "Of course, Mom. Sarah, this is my mother, Helen. Mom, this is Sarah, and this is David." Helen carefully sat down in the armchair, her eyes fixating on the baby, who continued to nurse peacefully. "He's beautiful," she said, and there was a genuine sincerity in her voice. "How many weeks old is he?" 3 weeks and 2 days, Sarah replied automatically, surprised by the kindness in Helen's tone. "Can I—" Helen slightly extended her hands toward David. Sarah looked at Richard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course." When David finished nursing, Sarah carefully placed him in Helen's arms. The transformation in her expression. The woman's reaction was instantaneous and moving. All formal authority disappeared, replaced by the universal tenderness of a grandmother meeting her grandchild. "Hi, little prince," whispered Helen, and David opened his little eyes as if studying the new face. "You look just like your father did when he was a baby. Same serious expression, same way of observing everything." Richard approached, sitting on the arm of the chair next to his mother. "Mom, why are you here?" Helen continued to observe David for a long moment before responding. "I came because I made a terrible mistake, son. A mistake that may have cost our family something far more valuable than money or social status." The sincerity in her voice caught everyone by surprise. Mary stopped pretending to organize the kitchen and moved closer to listen better. "In the past few weeks, since you left home, I've had time to think about many things, about how we raised you, about the pressures we placed on your shoulders, about what really matters in life." Helen paused, gently kissing David's forehead. "And then Jessica told me that you had become a father." Marina felt a chill run down her spine. "Jessica came to talk to you?" "She did. And she said terrible things about you, about your intentions, about how you were being naive to believe in Richard's feelings." Helen looked directly at Marina. "But do you know what made me realize she was wrong?" "What?" asked Marina, genuinely curious. "The fact that she spoke about you and this baby as if they were problems to be solved, obstacles to your plans. Anyone who talks about a child that way doesn't understand anything about real family." Richard seemed to be processing his mother's words with a mix of hope and caution. "Mom, what exactly are you saying?" Helen carefully transferred David back to Marina and turned to face her son. "I'm saying that your father and I were wrong. We were so concerned with preserving what we built that we forgot to ask what you really wanted out of life." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Richard, you are my only son. The company, the money, the family traditions, none of that has meaning if you're not there to carry it on. But more importantly, none of it is worth anything if you're not happy." Marina felt her eyes fill with tears. Mary moved closer and sat beside her, offering silent support. "I came here to meet my daughter-in-law and my grandson," Helen continued, "and to apologize for the way I treated you. I also came to make a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Richard asked, still cautious. "We want you to come back to the company, not as an obedient heir, but as a partner with full powers to implement your own ideas. We want to fund your consultancy, turning it into a division of the company focused on helping small producers." Helen looked at Marina. "And we want Marina to be officially recognized as a member of our family, along with David." The silence that followed was heavy with complex emotions. Marina felt her heart racing, barely able to believe what she was hearing. "And Jessica?" Richard finally asked. "Jessica has been informed that the business agreement between the families will be renegotiated on purely professional terms. She didn't take the news well, but this is a final decision." Richard looked at Marina, searching her eyes for guidance on how to respond. Marina stroked David thoughtfully before speaking. "Mrs. Helen, I truly appreciate your kind words and your proposal, but I need to ask, is this a genuine offer, or is it a way to control Richard through us?" The direct question surprised Helen, but she smiled with what seemed to be approval. "Marina, you are exactly the kind of strong woman I would expect my son to choose. No, it's not control. It's recognition that true family cannot be bought or controlled. It is earned through mutual respect and genuine love." Richard stood up and walked to the window, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. "Mom, I need time to think. I can't make a decision like this hastily." "Of course. But Richard—" Helen also stood up, preparing to leave. "Regardless of your decision about the business, I want you to know that you are welcome in our family. David is my grandson, and nothing will change that." She moved closer to Marina and, surprisingly, gently kissed her forehead. "Thank you for taking such good care of my son and for giving me a beautiful grandson." After Helen left, the apartment fell into silence for long minutes. David had fallen asleep, and Marina carefully placed him in the crib before turning to Richard. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking that my life has changed completely in less than 6 months, and I'm trying to understand if my mother's proposal is a real opportunity or an elaborate trap." Mary, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "Son, may I give my opinion?" Richard smiled for the first time since Helen arrived. "Of course, Mrs. Mary. That woman traveled all the way here, met her grandson, apologized, and made a concrete proposal. Either she is the best actress in the world, or she is being sincere. And honestly, after seeing how she looked at David, I think it's the latter." Marina nodded. "Richard, the decision is yours. But whatever your choice, we will face it together. We are a family now, with or without the world's approval." Richard kissed her softly. "That's exactly why I love you. You always remind me of what really matters." That night, as David slept between them in bed and Richard worked a few extra hours on his laptop, Marina looked out the window at the city lights and smiled. There was something poetic about the fact that their story, which began with shy notes exchanged through lunchboxes, had transformed into something so... In the heart of the city, Helen Anderson was in her living room, looking at an old photo of David as a child playing on his grandfather's farm. Beside her, a new photo, taken discreetly during the afternoon visit, showed Gabriel sleeping in his mother's arms. For the first time in months, Helen smiled with genuine happiness. Her family was finally complete again. But in another apartment, Jessica was organizing papers in a folder with a determined expression. If the Anderson family thought she would give up easily, they were very mistaken. There were other ways to get what she wanted, and she was ready to use them all. The story of Sarah and David was far from having a definitive ending, but one thing was certain. They had learned that true love is not built solely from romantic moments, but from daily choices to stay united in the face of life's storms. And as Gabriel grew up amidst the aroma of his mother's homemade food and the lullabies his father made up for him, the small family in Chinatown discovered that sometimes the most beautiful endings are actually new beginnings in disguise.